Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, with that, we come to the end of track 2. So after this, we are going to have a short break for 15 minutes, but after that, we are going to have 2 very important keynote sessions by Rosalind Radcliffe and Sanjeev Sharma. This is something that you would not want to miss. And lastly, at the last leg of the DevOps India Summit, we're going to have a very important panel discussion wherein we're going to discuss about the role of leadership in DevOps. So we're going to have all these 3, one after the other, after this short tea break that we're going to have right now. So please, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome once again to the last leg of the DevOps India Summit 2019. I hope all of you are refreshed after the tea networking break. Are you guys refreshed now? Yes. Yeah, I just saw one hand going up, Padma. Any more? I need some noise, guys. This is the last leg. Everyone, let's see some hands up in the air. Are you guys with me on that? All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the DevOps India Summit 2019. Without much further ado, let me introduce our next speaker on stage. Well, he's already on stage, but I'll just give an introduction of him. He is an internationally renowned cloud and DevOps transformation and strategy executive and thought leader. He is the author of award-winning bestseller, The DevOps Adoption Playbook and DevOps for Dummies. He has been a keynote speaker at various global IT conferences. He is currently leading the new data modernization practice at Delphix. And today, he will share his thought on if data friction is putting a crimp in your CD/CI flow. So without much further ado, please help me welcome on stage, he's already on stage. Let's give a big round of applause for Mr. Sanjeev Sharma, everyone.
Thank you, Ria. So here is a live demo of what happens if all your CI/CD pipeline, all the silos are not in sync. The slowest silo stops the whole train. We've all been waiting for them to clean it up, right? So as Ria mentioned, my name is Sanjeev Sharma. I actually changed the title. I thought that is data friction putting a crimp in your CI/CD flow really boring? So I changed it. The new title is My Code, My Environment, and yes, My Data. So let's talk about that, right? So let's do a quick survey, right? How many of you are developers? Developers, have been developers, intend to be developers? Okay, how many managers in the room? Okay, how many DBAs? DBAs, no DBAs? One DBA, sorry guys. You will be the butt of all the jokes today. System administrators, testers, QA people, QA, excellent. There's still a difference between developers and QA? I thought we had fixed that, right? How about release engineers? Okay, how many people have the word DevOps in your title? Man, you're behind the times. In America, everybody says DevOps in the title. So actually, those who don't say DevOps in the title say AI and machine learning in the title.
Or cloud.
The cloud is old now. Everybody says cloud is already taken off. So I've been around. So my name is Sanjeev Sharma. I work for Delphix. I'm from India originally, in case you hadn't guessed that. But I've been in the US for most of my life. Been in the IT industry for a very long time, and used to work for IBM. Most of the IBM folks here, I know them extremely well. Rosalind will be speaking next. She's one of my mentors. So I'm looking forward to her talk also. I've written 2 books. The first one I wrote is called DevOps for Dummies. There's a new DevOps for Dummies in the market today, actually, a full-size one. Mine was only like a short 80-page one. Emily Freeman from Microsoft wrote that. I haven't, unfortunately, read it yet, but I'm sure it's good. She's a very respected DevOps relations person. And the new book is DevOps Adoption Playbook, which we'll be giving away 2 copies at the end. So pay close attention. If you answer the questions right, you may win a copy. And I've been blogging about DevOps and application delivery for around a decade now, so you can go to my blog and check it out. So people ask me, which book should I read, DevOps for Dummies or DevOps Adoption Playbook? So DevOps Adoption Playbook is for you. DevOps for Dummies is for people you work with. Good, some of you got that. So I'm a sports fanatic, right? If you read my book, DevOps Adoption Playbook, every topic I introduce has a sports analogy. There are cricket analogies, there's American football analogies, basketball, cricket, you name it, badminton even, right? But the only sport I claim to play is tennis. Now, my thesis of this slide is that all the innovation in this world has been driven by the democratization of the technology, and it is the democratization of technology that results in innovation truly becoming useful. And the example I give you here is about tennis. Tennis has been around for a long time. The first reference I could find to tennis rackets was from 1847, and those rackets used to be made of solid wood. Then in the mid-1900s, those rackets became of laminated wood. In fact, the first racket I ever picked up was my dad's tennis racket, and it was a laminated wood heavy racket. You didn't need to go lift weights, you just played tennis. Right? It was wood, and the strings were actually made of cat guts. So cat intestines were what made the string. In fact, I've been told that you can still go to a company called Babolat, and they'll sell you cat intestine strings. Then came steel rackets, then came graphite rackets in the 90s, and today we have these composite rackets with multi-filament strings where you can adjust the tension down to a pound per square inch. And you can control the spin, you can do lots of fun things, which I don't know if you guys are watching the US Open. You can see some of these players like Kyrgios do some very interesting things. That's not the point of this slide. The point of this slide is that today racket technology has become democratized. The racket Roger Federer plays with, world number 3 right now, I think, or 4, but world champion, right, has won more wins than anybody else, 100 championship wins, is the very same racket my son, and this is actually my son, plays tennis with. The same racket. Back in the day when I was playing tennis, if I wanted the racket which Bjorn Borg or Ivan Lendl was playing with, I would have had to place a special order. I would have had to go tell my dad, please go take a loan out because I need this special racket. And we would have gotten it in months. Today, my son and I went on to a retail website, and 2 days later, the very same racket which Federer plays with was what my son was playing with. He has access to the same shoes. I have no idea why he has so many sneakers, but that's what kids do nowadays. They collect sneakers. But he has access to the same tennis shoes which the world champions play with, and that's democratization. That means you've taken technology and gotten it into the hands of the people who need it in a cost-effective manner. There are no specializations and controlled access anymore. To me, DevOps is all about democratizing your application delivery, your CI/CD pipeline. Making those capabilities available to people who need them in a controlled and effective manner, but making it available to them so they can self-serve that capability. Where are the Spark people? Is Ankit still here? Ankit in the room? Ankit? Yeah, they're in the back there, right? They actually have a DevOps in a box. I don't know if you went to their booth today, right? They have a switch. You press the switch and application gets deployed. That is democratization. They can take the switch anywhere. It's controlled to the internet, and you're pushing a button, right? And I thought I will take it with me back to America and give it to somebody and tell him it's a missile button and see how he reacts. But there is democratization. You have made something available. So if I'm a developer and I want to build my code, I don't need to open a ticket with a build engineer anymore. I can build it myself. If I need to deploy my code, if you have adopted DevOps, okay? If you haven't and you're still building tickets, go talk to somebody. We can help you. If I need to deploy the code, what do I need to do? I don't need to call the deployment engineer. I push a big green button in a tool of my choice, Urban Code, Zebia Labs, Jenkins, whatever, and my code gets deployed. I want an environment, what do? I go push a button and my environment gets provisioned and configured. That is democratization. If you look at the layers, what DevOps has focused on so far is the democratization of infrastructure. That's the first thing people usually fix. Can I get my environment faster? And can I allow my developers and testers to self-serve that environment to themselves so they don't have to go to somebody else and open a ticket and wait for 6 days for somebody to give me the environment and then charge me money if I need to make a change to it, which was the old traditional way. Then we democratize the software delivery lifecycle, the CI/CD pipeline. Can I build and deploy the code myself? One area we forgot to democratize is data, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. Today, I can self-serve myself my environment. I can use, you saw the presentation today morning from Microsoft about Azure DevOps and how you can self-serve. I saw Rosalind was deploying COBOL code to the mainframe, to ZOS via self-service. You don't need a mainframe systems engineer anymore in order to deploy the code. You can self-serve it without knowing anything about the mainframe. So you're abstract. One of the aspects of democratization is you abstract away the details which you do not need to be an expert on. And we have all these tools like Chef and Ansible and Terraform and CloudFormation and all those tools to help me configure the environment I'm trying to self-serve. Same way with CI/CD pipeline, we have all these CI/CD build automation tools. We have Jenkins, we have Docker, we have Git, Kubernetes, Urban Code, Zebia Labs, Atomic, Azure DevOps. Name your poison, right? You've got a tool which allows me to self-serve it. But if I want data, if I want test data, what do I need to do? I need to open a ticket with a DBA. That's one thing. How many of you can self-serve data? How many of you, Topo can? How many of you can have to open a ticket and request the data through somebody else? How many of you don't even know how that data comes? So that's what I'm focused on today. I'm focused on ensuring, and what we'll talk about today is this concept of data ops, which says how do I operationalize my data so I can make it self-service, so I can democratize the availability and accessibility and agility of the data I need. But what does that mean? First of all, I need to be able to manage data like code, which means I should be able to version my data. I need to be able to branch my data. I need to be able to make changes to my data, not like them and go back to before it. So if I'm doing destructive testing and changing the data, I should be able to push a button and say, this test didn't work, let me go back. Let me data set go back to what it was before I ran the tests. I should be able to make data available self-service, not have to request a DBA to give it to me. And it should be available to me on demand, not require 5 days of work and 7 days of waiting before that in order to get a database for me to do testing. It should be data source agnostic. Another challenge all the DBAs face is that if I have multiple data sources, how I provision an Oracle database versus how I provision a MongoDB database or how I provision some other NoSQL database is all different. They all have different tools. How can you have self-service? Which means then I as a developer or a QA professional will need to learn all those technologies and how all those databases work. Can you give me just one big green button to push and I get my data irrespective of where the data is coming from and how it's coming? One of the concepts of democratization is also that I have guardrails, which means if I am allowed to do something via automation, the policies built in the automation should prevent me from doing something that is not allowable. So which means that if I am self-serving data to me, that data should be secure and compliant. It should be masked and obfuscated so that I don't unintentionally expose customer privacy, PII data, or PHI data, or PCI data by mistake and put my company at risk. I was working with a client recently, and they had a policy. Their development center is here in India, and they're in Europe, they're in France, that if the data is not masked, it cannot be provisioned to a test environment, which is in India. So immediately a pop-up comes and says, oh, this data set has GDPR compliant data. You cannot provision it because you have not yet masked it. That's self-service by putting up guardrails to control what you can do and not do. And lastly, the data provisioning and data management, even deprovisioning, should be a part of your CI/CD pipeline, not a separate process. Today it's a separate process. You have your CI/CD pipeline, there's no reference to data in it. How do you make data an integral part of it? These to me are the key points which we'll talk about, which will allow you to democratize your data and bring it at par with environments and code. But let's step back for a second and talk about democratizing data, DevOps in general, right? Because we are saying that's already solved, right? But what does that mean? And what challenges have we observed that people have faced over the last few years facing it, right? And that's the essence of my book. This is a brief commercial for my book. So what the challenge we've seen people face, and the reason I wrote the book is that most companies are not homogeneous. They are not monolithic, right? We have this concept of the two pizza team. Right? AWS started this idea that all teams should be big enough and small enough that they can eat 2 pizzas. Now, I personally know individual people who can eat 2 pizzas, so I've never known what that means. Right? So I can see some of you in this room who could probably eat 2 pizzas, but also depends on the size of pizza. We have large pizza in America, which is really big, and then anyway, let me not go there. But so DevOps works fine when all the teams are 2 pizza teams. But what happens in large enterprise when that's not the case? We were talking over coffee with somebody, and they were saying, what about distributed teams? Because I have offshore, onshore teams. I have in-house and outsourced teams. All those are challenges which need to be addressed, and there are some key principles which need to be put in place in order to address those. The first area that needs to be addressed is planning. You can't execute anything without planning. By the way, this picture I just took outside, that's how the power supply to this hotel comes. Nobody's getting that one. Okay. So, so you can go, your delivery pipeline, as we observed, right? What was this an example of bad planning? They didn't start removing the partition at the right time for us to start on time, right? If they knew when we needed to start, and if they knew how long it takes to remove that partition, and that they have to remove 2 partitions, and they cannot do it in parallel, they should have started twice the time before. That is planning. And what happens in large organizations is that one application has a very fast cadence, they're releasing every 2 weeks, another application is releasing every 6 months. You are dependent on a feature on the 6-month release cycle application. You have released, what do you do now? You hurry up and wait. You can only go as fast as the slowest partition separation team on your organization. You cannot go any faster, and that requires a very good understanding of the cadence, the release cycle, and the release velocity of every team, and also the interdependencies those teams have between each other. Those interdependencies can only be determined if you have good understanding of the architecture of your systems. Everybody has good understanding of the architecture of their application, but when you start looking at across, what Topo was talking about this morning, if you start looking at the interdependencies between thousands of applications, hundreds of applications and now thousands of microservices, how does that architecture and the interdependencies behave? Most applications, their architecture is like this building. If they move the refrigerator from the left side to the right side, the building will topple. Because it was built for a certain set of use cases, and they kept adding more use cases and more use cases and more use cases, and nobody paid off the technical debt to re-architect it. Everybody is talking about doing microservices. Trust me, the toughest job on earth, Gary probably talked about it in his session, is to take a large monolith and break it into microservices. It's not easy. And eventually we need to talk about test data, right? I love this slide. This meme. And I was doing this presentation, BMK knows where I was doing this presentation, and afterwards I'm having lunch with the CIO, and he's laughing, he's trying to put on his best Scottish Gerard Butler accent and say, tonight we test in prod. And his second in command starts laughing, puts his head down and says, dude, we've been testing in prod only. We don't have time to do real testing. We test in prod. Right? And there's a tweet I sent out. This is probably the most retweeted tweet I've ever sent out, right? If your sprint is 2 weeks long, but it takes you 3 weeks to get test data, how long is your sprint? But that's the reality we face every day. Your Topo had a complete slide on test management today morning, and it all depends upon, can I get the right test data to the right people at the right time? And it's high quality data, not the wrong data. It is legally required to have any DevOps presentation to put this meme in, right? It's been there since 2012, sorry. In fact, I recently saw they interviewed this girl, and she insists she did not set the house on fire. It wasn't her, but she looks really guilty. Here's a quote from an actual defense contractor I was working with. I was helping them adopt DevOps, and they said that for them, the #1 goal is quality. Because after you launch the missile, you can't update. There's no over-the-air update of OTA, right? You have a new version of code when it's a missile. In fact, I was doing some project for the Navy, and the way the Navy patches systems is you remove the server rack, and you put in a new server rack with the new version. So the cost of fixing bugs in production is very, very high. So quality is dependent upon having the right data, and we'll talk more about how to get the right data and what the intricacies of what that data means. Eventually, the last lesson learned, and probably the most important lesson learned from democratizing all the services and capabilities in DevOps is, it's a people problem. It's a cultural problem. Somebody asked me today, I think I won't tell you who asked, right? Hey, if my senior management is not seeing the vision about DevOps, what should I do? I said, fire the management. No, we can't do that, right? Obviously, for good reasons. You can leave, but you can't do that, right? What do you mean? So you have to educate people. At the end of the day, it's a cultural problem, and fixing cultural problems is both a top-down and a bottom-up problem. It is a question of finding out what the motivations are. The motivations of the practitioners are going to be very different from the motivations of the executive management. It is also very important to understand what your business goals are. The first thing when I walk in and I'm doing some kind of an assessment with a client is I always ask them, what are your business drivers? Why are you doing all this technology transformation? Is it because you went to DevOps India Summit and now think DevOps is cool, so you should do it? Or do you have a real business reason? Because cultural transformation without sponsorship from senior management is not going to happen, no matter how much those of us in the ground want to make it happen. So that's kind of a brief review of the changes that need to be made in order to democratize your CI/CD pipeline, democratize all the DevOps capabilities. Now let me shift gears and come back to democratizing data in your CI/CD pipeline. And data ops is this new term, right? It's the new buzzword. And nowadays it seems the only way you can create a buzzword is take the word you want to talk about and put ops after it, right? There's DevOps, there's DevSecOps, there's AI ops, there's BizOps, there's IT ops, there's chat ops, there's hug ops, and now there's data ops. There's chat ops, right? Everything is on Slack. That's chat ops, automated through Slack. I don't know what hug ops is. I don't want to go there. So I was looking for definitions of data ops. Where I work, we have our own definition, but I didn't want to quote that one. I wanted to quote Gartner's. If you remove the word data from this and rewrite it saying application development, you could very well have a definition, one of many, of DevOps. So what does this definition really mean? What is data ops? What data ops is essentially saying that you need to make the distribution and accessibility and agility of data more lean and agile, and make the people who own data and the people who manage data and the people who need data, the consumers, have them collaborate in a more lean and effective manner and gain trust and collaboration, which was like when we talk about application development and delivery was the goal of DevOps. But this applies to beyond application delivery, right? In fact, the term data ops did not come from the application delivery side, it came from the data science side. Because on the data science and AI and machine learning side, they were having a lot of challenges. In fact, one of the first definitions I read of data ops came from a company called Data Kitchen, and they've been doing a lot of work in this space around AI and machine learning and data science implementations. And they were facing the same problem which we, 10 years ago, were facing in application delivery, that there were very well-defined silos, and those silos did not communicate very well. And if you want to do true data-driven application development, data-driven AI and machine learning and data science, you need the accessibility of data. Data needs to be made available to those who need it, when they need it, in a secure and compliant manner. Adopting that is today what is known as data ops. But we'll talk about today of data ops in the context of DevOps, because this is a DevOps conference. So why is the agility of data so complex, so difficult? Well, first of all, data has a lot of inertia, right? It's not easy to move it. If somebody comes to you and says, it's taking so long for me to get my test data, well, one of the reasons is, of course, the DB is, for them, giving you test data is not a priority. It's always at the bottom of the list, wherever that one DBA we had, right? It's always, your job is not to give test data to the developers. You have 20 other priorities, this is not one of them, right? 99 problems and this ain't one. So, secondly, if they do provision the data, if it's a 100 terabyte database, how long will it take for you to provision it? A lot of time. It takes, you're copying, making physical copies. It takes time, it has inertia. So there are provisioning costs and delays. Secondly, it's risky, right? We've all heard about all the data breaches which happen all the time. Today it's a given, right? After this recent breach happened for one of the credit card companies, my wife came and said, we have that card, what's going to happen? I'm like, do you think there are people out there who already don't know our social security numbers and half our passwords? That's not happening. That boat has already sailed. Long gone, right? So don't worry. If some charge comes up, we'll handle it then, right? Data has been breached. Who was saying the other day, right? There are two kinds of people in this world, those who have been hacked and those who don't know it yet. That's the truth. But we have all these growing measures, right? We have GDPR, we have CCPA, which is California's GDPR, which is going to impact everybody as a customer in California. It is effectively what the 6th largest country in the world, if it was an independent country. That's a lot of people. So if you are here, find out about CCPA because you're going to be impacted by it. Data is complex. I remember doing an architectural assessment of a SaaS application, and it has 6 different databases in it. There was a separate database for records, separate database for transaction. There was 2 caching databases. There was a separate indexing database. That's what a modern application architecture looks like. Different technologies fit for purpose. And it's scattered. There are new islands being developed, right? If you have 2 clouds, guess what? You have 2 islands of data, other than the island you already had, all the islands you already had on premises. And it's usually incompatible because it might be locked behind a packaged application and you don't have access to it. It might have its own, and the DBAs are very protective of it. They don't want to give the keys to the kingdom to anybody. So what DataOps allows you to do, and the goal of DataOps is to make test secure and compliant in the context of application delivery, test data available to those who need it, whether you're a developer or a QA professional, in a secure and compliant manner. Most DataOps platforms, and the company I work for has one of the DataOps platforms, have 3 components. The first one is virtualization, where you are ingesting data from all your data sources, storing it in a golden copy, and then making virtual instances of it available to whoever needs it whenever they need it, so that it can be provisioned in minutes instead of hours. The second thing you do is you secure the data. You secure it in 2 ways. First is you mask it. So you're obfuscating all the PII, PCI, HIPAA, all that information which can expose some risk. And the third thing you do is you provide layers of governance. You have policy-based controls, role-based access and controls, policy-based controls like the one I spoke about earlier. Where can the data be provisioned? Who can provision it? For how long? Right? For all kinds of regulatory requirements. Today, it's important to also deprovision data when it's dead, when it's not needed. I'll give you an example. If somebody opens up a right to forget request under GDPR, you have 45 days to make that person's instance disappear everywhere, including in every test data copy you have. If you don't have a deprovisioning policy, you won't know where that copy exists. And then make that data available to whoever needs it via self-service. That means via APIs and command line. They can provision data, play around with the data just the way they would provision an environment or a build request. And then you can integrate it into your application delivery pipeline. The end goal, as I mentioned, for DataOps is to, in the context of application delivery, is to make it a part of your CI/CD pipeline. That whether you are integrating it with your Git, your Jenkins, your GitLab, GitHub, whatever you're using, or your deployment automation tool, or your test tool, whoever needs data should be able to get it via self-service. And this gives you a totally integrated pipeline where data becomes available to developers for unit testing. Most unit testing doesn't happen today because of lack of data. Sure, you need synthetic data to test new features, but also you need production-like data in order to really do production-like testing early. Shift left means more unit testing, less integration testing. This becomes even more interesting when you're testing across multiple application delivery pipelines. Topo and I were just talking before this, and if you have feature A, which is dependent upon data set 1, and you have feature X, which is dependent upon data set 7, you need to make sure that those data sets are synchronized. If feature A, this application delivery on the top here, has a release cycle of every 2 weeks, and it's a very simple NoSQL database, you are provisionally refreshing the test data every 2 weeks. But if this other application is close your ears, Rosalind, is a traditional COBOL application which you release only every 6 months, your data set might be 6 months old. Now, if you do integration testing across all of them, your integration testing is not reliable because one data set is from current data and one is from data 6 months old. So what is the answer? The answer is to speed up your slowest life cycle, or if you are unable to do it today, be situationally aware to say that these 2 data sets are out of sync, and you need to ensure that when the feature A which you're testing, you're testing it from a time slice from 6 months ago. So the data sets are synchronized. And this works for the data and also for the schemas, which also need to be versioned. So versioning your test data becomes very important, and being able to go back and forth over time over that timeline is also important. Let me leave you with 2 case studies. Here is an insurance client. They had 3 test environments, and 35 different development teams were testing their test environment. They had static storage. So what did they have to do? Every time a new application team came, they had to delete the previous team's data because they couldn't provision 2 databases, limited storage. and then they would request with DBS to put in fresh data into that environment. One application at a time. They couldn't do integration testing because all the data couldn't be made available across all the data sets. Once they were able to virtualize the data, and they were able to create, adopt data ops as a practice. Today they have 35 different test environments. So each development project team has its own test environment. They can test separately of each other, they can test in parallel, and they can do integration testing across all the 35 projects to ensure that they're doing end-to-end testing with the right test data sets. An even better example was this global bank I've been working with. They again had an example that they had 50 plus production databases. Every time they needed to refresh the test data in the test environment, it was taking them 5 to 7 days. And this was a major bottleneck for the development teams, the 50 plus development teams. Today, they're able to provision a test environment for each Git branch on which they're working. Last time I visited them, they had over 3,000 test environments provisioned in parallel. That means each development team, each development squad had its own test data set in order to do unit testing. Then they had separate test data sets available to do integration testing. And all of this was managed from a central console. All of this was self-service. So the developers, all they needed, and the QA professionals, all they needed to do was make API calls to the data ops platform and provision the data when they needed it and refresh it on time. They can do A/B testing. They can branch the data and do A/B testing over data sets. Think about trying to do that with a physical database, branching a data and doing A/B testing. They're able to go back and forth in time and come up with interesting scenarios like saying, last Diwali time, a lot of shopping sales happened. Give me the test data from that time so I can test against it and do some real scenario-based stress testing. Last but not the least, people talk a lot about how do I create a right roadmap? How do I help my senior management understand that democratization of the CI/CD pipeline is adopted? I've adopted DevOps, I'm doing everything else, but my data is still a separate silo, and I'm unable to convince people that data needs to be democratized also. The way to do that is to understand what bottlenecks, what inefficiencies that lack of agility of data causes. One of the techniques I've been using for the last decade or so, man, this is loud, last decade or so. Next I expect a trap door to open and I fall in, right? I think Niladri will do that next year. Right, so the goal is to create a value stream, do a value stream assessment of a delivery pipeline and look for where the inefficiencies are and identify which one of those inefficiencies are due to the lack of agility of data. And this would be an example of what such a result of a value stream mapping would look like. Most of these are available on YouTube. If you search for DevOps whiteboard, you'll find a video of me doing a value stream mapping assessment. Well, thank you for your time. I'm supposed to ask 2 questions now. You can clap.
Thank you, Sanjeev, for that wonderful session.
Sure.
Yes, sir, we can have one question from Sanjeev to the audience, and the person who answers the question correctly wins a prize. But Sanjeev, I want you to pick out the person.
Sure. So
who would want to
question
answer.
1, what's the URL of my blog? Not you, BMK. Yeah, in the back there. sdarchitect.blog. Okay, yeah, you win. All right, it's sdarchitect.blog. All right,
Please join us on stage.
Yeah, I'll sign it. Yeah, I'll sign it. Hold on to this. I'll come to you. Yeah.
A big round of applause, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right. Can I request Dr. Niladri Chaudhary to please join us on stage?
Oh, one more.
Okay, one more question. Okay, great. One more question from Sanjeev.
What was the name of? I was going to come up with a not so logical, not so good question. Now you're throwing me off. What is value stream mapping? What are the 3 things you look for in value stream mapping? Over there.
No, wait.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So waste, weight, and implementation, basically.
Nope. Third one is wrong. In the back, rework. Okay, yes, sir. Over there. Yeah. Come.
Please join us
You
on
got
stage.
it.
Yes, you have to come on stage.
And I didn't even say that, so he was really reading the slides. This is good.
I think you have big fans out here. A lot of people have been.
All right, congratulations. Yeah. All right, thank you for your time, everybody.
All right, Dr. Niyati Chaudhary, please request you to kindly felicitate Sanjeev Sharma and present him with a certificate and memento. Let's have some noise, everyone. Thank you, Sanjeev, for joining us.